This is a secure CyberConnect podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson, where we're joined by information, cybersecurity, technology and talent acquisition professionals who share their journeys, unique perspectives and offer advice and guidance. Our topics on this episode were third-party supply chain and risk. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Mark Child and Paul Foster from Revolved. Mark is a highly experienced CEO and has founded and spearheaded successful technology risk management, operational risk and compliance consultancies, devised new concept, and expanded their operations to Europe, USA, and the Middle East. You've worked with a number of leading FTSE and NASDAQ companies, fulfilling various roles including Chief Information Security Officer, Head of Information Security, and Director of IT Audit, and has been a non-executive director for several fintech startups. He's also authored and validated information security standards and baselines to ensure the continued adoption of security best practices. His thesis on technology risk management is one of the most read publications on the Emerald Higher Education Teaching and Learning Forum. His academic research includes maritime and aviation cybersecurity, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and artificial intelligence. He's also contributed to professional articles for the Financial Times, PAM, SC Magazine, CISO Mag, the Science Institute of Internal Auditors, Dye Corporation, Virgin Media and the BBC. He's a guest lecturer, public and professional speaker at conference and roundtable partnership. Most recently, he has been one of the co-founders of Cyber London, widely recognised by the UKC Green, the official cyber cluster of Pauline. Paul is a self-confessed tech freak who believes strongly both in people and products. With a long-standing cybersecurity background, his experience has earned him a reputation for success through a proven track record, manage a high-profile IT business change program within both national and international banks, fintechs, and several AI startups, where he has raised seed funding, increased their value and future worth, propelled them to the next level of minimal viable product in readiness for mass sale of their products and services. His C-level experience has ensured governance and compliance of technology platforms globally, and as a visionary, he has designed and enhanced many product solutions, capitalizing on return on investments and maximizing investment growth. He's been awarded advisory board member of the Trustless Computing Association and is a customer advisory board member for a global bank, along with international technology companies and web security vendors, and works with leading FTSE companies fulfilling various roles, including Chief Tech Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Security Officer, and Global Head. Mark, Paul, a warm welcome to the Secure CyberConnect podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks very much.
So to kick things off, we usually ask the same question and wondered if both of you could kindly share with us something that you're either very proud of or excited about, just wish to shine a light on that isn't typically to be found on your LinkedIn profiles.
I'll start there. So there's an awful lot on my LinkedIn profile. So I thought I'd go a little bit off piece. So in my youth, I was incredibly proficient at something called beat juggling. So any DJs out there, i.e. the proper ones who are proficient in vinyl, will understand that this is where you use two copies of the same record, flipping back and forth to create new patterns and extended breaks. Mastering this involves perfect timing, coordination, and it's a pretty serious workout for the wrists and brain. If you can nail it, you're pretty much in that elite crew of turntablism. So that's a little bit about me and where I originally came from and what I used to do.
Nice.
But mine's not quite as sexy as Mark's. But this is going back somewhat now, back to 1988. So I used to work in Sheffield Town Centre at that point, and I used to frequent the local snooker club. And it just so happened at that time, the World Championship was on at the Crucible. And I spotted a guy, and I thought, I'm sure I know who that is. And I did. It was Eddie Charlton, the Australian snooker champion. So just being as cheeky as I was back then, I just walked up to him and said, look, do you fancy a knockabout, have a couple of games? He said, yeah, absolutely. And we proceeded, had a couple of games. I lost out on 2 frames on black ball games. But to his credit, he'd actually gone on that year to reach the quarterfinals of the World Championships. So it's kind of like, pat on the back, didn't learn too about there, losing all white ball games. Yeah, that's me.
Not too shabby.
Brilliant. Appreciate you sharing. So could each of you kindly share one challenge that you perhaps faced in your career that significantly influenced your perspective on cybersecurity?
Yeah, happy to start there. So People who know me and people who don't, I actually worked and trained a lot with law enforcement, and that provided me with a completely unique perspective on cybersecurity. Their mission is all about preventing crime and protecting the public. The key focus is on cyber terrorism, hacking and cyber extortion, whereas businesses view cybersecurity mainly as a way to protect their assets, their customer data and reputation. Their focus is largely on risk management, compliance, and ultimately ensuring business continuity. The common denominator is that the bad guys are invariably one step ahead, as they're better resourced, may or may not be state-sponsored, do not have to answer for their actions, and most importantly, they don't have to follow the rules. So to that extent, the need is to be an acceptance that while cybersecurity is incredibly challenging, with the right resources and investment, you can stand your ground. Unfortunately, as we've seen, the statistics clearly back up that most businesses don't have the required pounds or resources to effectively do that. And to that extent, I still think we're fighting a very challenging war against cybercrime. And hopefully through today's podcast, and I know we're looking particularly at third-party supply chain risk, and we'll be able to give some insights into that and give people half a chance to, as I say, stand their ground and defend themselves.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And what about yourself, Paul?
Yeah, well, mine came about, working for a tier one bank and trying to get buy-in from 51 in-country CIOs to enable the rollout and permission to roll out Ed security products. That was going to be a massive uplift, right, as far as security protection and posture was concerned. And it just rang home to me that there's still a problem, right? Driving security from top down. We still don't have that. There's still many breaches happening because of the kind of resistance experience from top down. So instead of having the buy-in at board level, and really making sure that security controls can be put in place, organizations constantly have this uphill struggle. So yeah, it just kind of makes me think, well, that's the reason why we're still in this predicament. This is why there's still so many breaches. It's just not taken seriously enough, and people still struggle in organizations getting that buy-in from executive management. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I see that from a lot of professionals that have spent time in the financial service space. Because it is highly regulated and fast moving, you fairly often, you're exposed to sort of the bleeding edge, not just technology, but of threats, of course, as well.
So in terms of the main security concerns with dependency on third-party risk, we know third parties experience operational failures. We know that, that service interruptions can disrupt business activities. And how do organizations ensure that they understand, third-party sort of security posture and ensure that there are no weak links within their supply chain? And generally, what are the main security concerns with the dependency of third-party risk?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take that one. So there are any number of risks, but I try and sort of capture the top 5 for you. And these are in no particular order, and it just depends what particular organization, what particular operation you have. But I think cybersecurity risks in general from a third-party perspective, you need to ensure that third parties have robust cybersecurity and measures in place to protect sensitive data from breaches and attacks. That's basically fundamental 101. You've then got the compliance and regulatory challenges, ensuring third parties comply with relevant regulations and standards. Of course, you then have the added challenge if you're a global enterprise or you're a business that does work overseas or in multiple locations. They tend to vary from region and indeed industry. Then a lack of visibility, so it's difficult to monitor and assess those security practices, particularly when you're dealing with multiple vendors. And this is something that we see quite a lot, that it's not just about that initial third-party supply chain, it's what we call the nth parties that come after that. So your 4th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th set of third parties that may be doing business with each other. So that's really particularly challenging. I also think, and this is an elaboration upon that point, It's about the volume and complexity of relationships. So managing a large number of third-party relationships, it can be quite overwhelming. And in turn, it also makes it really hard to keep track of each party's security posture. And then that lack of continuous monitoring. There is a need, and a real need, for ongoing assessment and monitoring of third-party security practices to identify and mitigate risk promptly. Now, obviously, you've got to put that in some kind of perspective. If that third party is supplying you with a product such as, I don't know, boots, and all it ever does is supply you with a number of boots that you order, then the impact on that particular third party to your organization might be minimal. However, if it's providing you with something that is more material to your operation, you need to take a number of other considerations. In answer to the second part of that question, which is really, how do you understand a third-party security posture, and how do you understand there are no weak links within the supply chain? I think, again, there's probably sort of 5 key things that I would list people to. The first is take inventory. Absolutely vital that you take inventory. If you don't maintain an accurate inventory of all your third parties and the information you share with each of them, you're going to be on a losing track before you even start. And the reality is, in our professional experience and all of the places that we've worked or engaged with, we invariably find that inventory is significantly lacking or falls short in terms of organizations and their respective supply chain. You've then got risk assessments. Now, there's a lot of chink around risk assessments, but you do need to conduct thorough risk assessments for each vendor to identify potential vulnerabilities, etc. You also need to evaluate compliance. So you need to ensure that third parties comply with relevant regulatory standards and frameworks. You've then got their security controls. So you need to evaluate their security controls that they've implemented to protect your data. And then, as I say, I go back again to this point, continuous monitoring. If you don't have ongoing monitoring to ensure third parties maintain security practices over time, then again, you will at some point or another get caught out. And I'm really sorry, the reality is what we see is that most organizations tend to do sporadic assessments. They either don't have the money or the resources to maintain that ongoing monitoring. And even where they do maintain ongoing monitoring, actually interpreting the risk, understanding that risk, and then giving the third party meaningful action to work with, and they tend to fall short.
In terms of understanding the resilience of third-party risk and how sort of evaluating the ability of these service providers to withstand and recover from, adverse conditions and continue to deliver essential services, how do we sort of create that understanding of resilience of third-party risk?
And again, Jay, you're looking at the usual suspects there. So I touched earlier about comprehensive risk assessments. These invariably, in my experience, tend to be too high a level. So you need to conduct in-depth evaluation of your third-party vendors. As I say, you need to look at their security measures, their business continuity plans, their risk management processes. And then you also need to develop their understanding of capacity to respond and recover from disruptions. And that is a hell of a lot that you need to do. And obviously, you've got to take a risk-based approach to that. You can't assess every single third party to that degree of depth and rigor. But again, that continuous monitoring that I keep going on about, you need to implement real-time monitoring tools and techniques to keep an eye on third-party activities and detect any irregularities or vulnerabilities promptly. And then you've got those regular audits and reviews. As I say, what we tend to see is they tend to be a little bit one-off or a little bit sporadic. So you need to schedule periodic reviews, and you need to ensure that ongoing compliance, as I say, with security and resilience standards. Probably one of the softer things that I see is collaboration and communication. You need to have open lines of communication with third parties. And I get that there's going to be a reluctance in some cases. There is so much regulation out there, and there are so many contractual stipulations. And I think about this from my audit background, and you can get sort of over-audited, or you can get audited to death, so as to speak, in terms of organizations just saying, do you know what? I work with 1,000 organizations that are all asking me the same question. they all want to come in and audit me. And I understand that again. So I think we need to look at better ways to influence that, to affect that, to make that less painful, if painful is the right word. So, and again, there is a reluctance. I think we do need to establish protocols for sharing information about potential threats and incidents, and then collaborate on joint response strategies. In our world, most of the exploits that we see, or most of the breaches that occur, have common base themes. But again, in industry, and I get incredibly frustrated with this, there is a real reluctance to share information. And a lot of the time when we support organizations, or I've worked in organizations, the answers are there. They've just not been particularly well publicized. Now, I understand if you're subject to a breach or you've got a piece of ransomware, for very good reason, you may not want to disclose that. You may want to work on that privately and covertly and keep yourself way below the radar. But the reality is there is a huge amount of information that can be shared and made available. The other two things for me are resilience testing. You need to conduct regular resilience testing, and that needs to include simulation and drills to evaluate the effectiveness of that third party in terms of their risk management and recovery strategies. Now, again, there will be quite a lot of reluctance to do this, but as a guy who sort of helped co-author 22301, which is the business continuity management standard, the reality is that organizations very rarely, and even if they do, they're not going to the depth that's required to test those third parties and the resilience they have around them. And there's also a little bit of reluctance of the third parties to obviously work with them to do that, because effectively you're opening your kimono to do so. So I think, again, I'm going back to my collaboration and communication point. That's absolutely vital. And then if you can get that type of buying, you've got half a chance of succeeding. And then I get down to what I consider to be the boring element, which is those contractual obligations. A lot of times when we look at contracts, those resilience and security requirements are not embedded or reflected in third-party contracts. And as such, without that, getting third parties to ensure they commit to maintaining robust risk management practices and provide some transparency around their procedures, etc., is incredibly difficult. And again, I'm a realist. I accept the reluctance to do that in some cases, and I accept the difficulties that are around that. But the reality is your contract is invariably going to be the point of reference you go to if there is a problem. And as I say, a lot of contracts we read are poorly constructed. I'd go as far as to say in some cases, maybe even deliberately so, which makes it sound a bit controversial. A lot of the time, action cannot be taken because the contract from the outset was not constructed as it should be. So that's my particular view on that.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. I mean, you're going back to your point on the sharing of information. I think a lot of security and technology leaders really need to take a step back and understand what's confidential information and what's malicious information. Sharing domains, for instance, and email addresses of threat actors that have popped up most recently is malicious. You don't necessarily have to disclose the confidential business information to the ecosystem and community.
Totally agree.
And on the sort of the legal and regulatory landscape, sticking with that, how has that evolved over the last sort of 24 months, and where do you see it heading in the future, Mark?
That's again a great question, because the regulatory and legal landscape is always evolving. I mean, I'm smiling because I've always had this frustration, having worked in major corporates, that you probably have too much legal and regulatory. And what do I mean by that? I've worked in organizations where you are subject to legal and regulatory requirements from multiple bodies. Now, I'm not being funny, but this is cybersecurity, it's third-party risk, it's data management. How many sets of regulations you actually really need? And most of the time, the regulation, of course, by default is very similar. There might be some local variations, there might be some local interpretations. But one of my biggest frustrations, and this is from a practitioner perspective, is that this regulation, of course it has to evolve and of course it has to change, but just the volume of regulations and regulatory bodies that they are make it incredibly difficult to manage. And as a guy who used to work at that C-suite, I took a very different approach to that legal and regulatory landscape. And effectively, I suppose it was quite a personal approach and very focused in terms of stating, right, I need to understand what all those regulations and legislation are. I probably know that most of the regulation is virtually identical. So let me try and correlate that. And then I've got half a chance of meeting the requirements. Of course, there's always going to be, as I say, local variations. The reality is at least I can tackle that. So I think in the last 24 months, there really has been an increased regulatory focus. Regulators have intensified their focus on third-party risk management with things like DORA and NIST. There's an emphasizing of the need for robust governance practice and risk management programs. And that includes, for me, what is a big shift towards that risk-based approach, requiring organizations to rank third parties on their criticality and risk to the enterprise. I think there's greater accountability. I think there's been a move towards placing more accountability on organizations to manage their third-party risks effectively. And that includes a number of expectations for ongoing monitoring and adherence to policies and standards. I think there are any number of compliance challenges. Organizations are finding it increasingly challenging to meet emerging compliance requirements. Regulatory trends are pointing towards more of accountability and less explicit instruction. And of course, that means organizations need to be far more proactive in their risk management efforts. And the reality is that's a huge shift that I've seen over my career, whereas initially the organization would be responsible, whereas now, as I say, there's far more focus on individuals. And I think that in itself is a real problem for our industry, in that accountability and responsibility is suddenly quite a dawning of reality for a lot of people, saying, actually, the business going to prison is going to be me. And that is an interesting proposition. And I think people talk about skill shortages and things like that, and we'll save that one for another day. But I also think there's maybe a reluctance now of some individuals to go into these roles on the basis that they do run those risks, whereby, as I say, it might be me going to prison and I'm accountable and responsible for a huge amount. And whilst I may have a great team, ultimately the buck stops with me. And finally, I think technological integration. The use of technology in third-party risk management has now become very sophisticated. There's a lot of automation and continuous assessment and monitoring of third parties. And that does really help in terms of staying ahead of potential risks and maintaining compliance with evolving regulations. But as I said, that automation also brings with it a number of challenges in that you are identifying risk and vulnerabilities far quicker and more effectively than you used to. That doesn't take away from the fact that you still got to go and mitigate and fix them.
It just adds to the workload of that security operations team, for instance.
Yep, 100%.
And going back to what you mentioned earlier, obviously different geographical locations, for instance, here, how important is understanding geopolitical factors with regards to third-party supply chain risk management?
Absolutely crucial. Geopolitical events such as, political instability, trade disputes, regional conflicts, they can all significantly disrupt supply chains. They lead to increased costs, longer lead times, and decreased efficiencies. So you really need to stay informed about geopolitical trends. I laugh because I think you guys know I wrote my thesis in technology risk management, and I wrote that a long time ago because I'm now getting incredibly old. But the reality is it's still incredibly relevant, which is why it's still very well read.
Part of the problems is along with the due diligence aspect anyway, right? So there's enough to take into account of what needs to be done along the third-party supply chain to make sure that it is secure and that all the weakest links are removed, right, in some way, shape, or form. Now, when you then add the geopolitical issues on top of that, bearing in mind that third-party risk management isn't really well done right now anyway by the vast majority of organizations. So a lot of that geopolitical tension, it could be heightened risk, it could be that, part of a country is being compromised in some way, shape, or form, in terms of, are they a friend or are they a foe? What are their nation states doing? How does that impact the third-party supply chain at that point? What do they use locally to provide that third-party service in the first place? So you've got to start thinking about all of this and adding together the overall sort of due diligence of third parties in its entirety, but then adding on top of that, what's happening in the world, where is it happening, and where's the emerging threats coming from that's going to increase the risk of the supply chain being compromised. And I think that's pretty much my aspect on it.
There's lots of purported sort of third-party risk management solutions available on the market. In terms of quantum, how does quantum solution Touchstone differentiate itself from that? And
Okay. So the differences here are more evident than ever. Now, if we just have a look at the history of how third-party risk has been conducted and still is conducted today, the vast majority of times. So there's two ways. So you're introduced to a third party. There's a small amount of due diligence then that's undertaken. A due diligence is normally via a third-party risk assessment questionnaire. So that will typically get sent to a third party. There's various questions on there that's then going to tease out what they do and how secure they are from both an intent purpose, and then they will also ask for something like a latest pen test. Now, that latest pen test from that third party that's going to supply that could have been 10 months or 11 months ago. Right. So generally speaking, if third party is being assessed, they'll have the questionnaire, they'll give you a pen test that's within the last 12 months. The problem with that pen test is as soon as it's done, it's out of date. Right. So whilst you may get this warm feeling that a pen test has been accomplished 11 months ago and there were only 2 medium type findings, in reality, if that was done yesterday or today, there might be several critical vulnerabilities highlighted. Now, this is where the real problem stems. You have a paper-based exercise, really a non-validated position because it was a point-in-time pen test, and you really don't get that sense of how secure that third party is and how secure the third-party supply chain is. Now, Touchstone, and the reason why we developed this, is we believe that all third parties, as well as organizations themselves, should be under continuous assessment. We know security is a moving target, but what we need to do is follow that moving target and have continuous assessment so we understand where problems are coming into play. We understand where things are being remediated and mitigated, and security posture is elevated and within customers' risk appetite for supply chain. But that can't be done without technologies. Now, we use technology for that very purpose. Continuous assess monitoring, highlight problems, anything that needs to be addressed quickly. We can provide automated notification so a customer becomes aware when a third party is placing them at risk, essentially. Critical vulnerability could be a 0-day vulnerability that's just appeared. Well, we can quickly check from that. Are the third party and said supply chain vulnerable to that 0-day? Who are they? Where are they? And what kind of risk are they putting the customer at? Well, that's what we can all do with QE Touchstone. And Touchstone does go a lot further than that as well. But as far as customer assessment is concerned, third party and supply chain assessment is concerned, it's automated, it's continuous, and we manage it and help facilitate remediation where needed with third parties to keep that customer secure. That's the biggest difference, really.
And in terms of some of the other key challenges that businesses are facing at the moment with all the requirements we've touched on, such as DORA, for example, in terms of meeting the requirements of all these new legislation, regulations, what else do you see as some of the major challenges organisations face?
So as far as meeting regulations are concerned, I think existing new specifications such as DORA and NIS2, etc. Yeah, again, this all comes back into play that there needs to be equal fundamentals put in place, such as QE Touchstone platform, that will go and support the auditing and also ensure that compliance is met. There is no easy way to do this without automation, and organizations will struggle and that they will have their own internal technical challenges. But, the solutions are there to be had. The innovation is there to be used. And, QE Touchstone is there to support DORA, NIS2, ISO 27001, GDPR. Doesn't matter what the compliance or regulatory standard framework is, we can supply that for the customer and make their lives a lot easier.
And Paul, why would you say achieving that becomes a competitive advantage for organisations?
Well, the $300,000 question here, Warren, is exactly that, right? So if you can then, as an organisation, provide a report to a company that wants to utilise you or use some of your services in some way, shape, or form, you can provide evidence of how secure you are and also how compliant you are. Now, when you're talking about cross international standards and frameworks that are required from different organizations, if I want to use someone in the US and it's something to do with healthcare, can they comply to HIPAA? Can they comply to CCPA? We need to understand. And the rapid speed of being able to respond to a third-party question and provide evidence that you're both compliant and secure puts you in a lot better position to win that business. So, that is the competitive advantage.
That's brilliant. And what would you say the sort of average reduction in time is in terms of getting these questionnaires back?
Well, as far as questionnaires are concerned and being able to provide some kind of evidence, literally within 24 hours. Now, if you're wanting something kind of immediate on perhaps a daily scan, a daily refresh, it can be 12 hours. That's it. But certainly within 24 hours, you got the full evidence, you got the full audit, you got the compliance report, and you've got the security posture, risk exposure as well. So it's easily understood, very quick to tap into.
That's brilliant. And Mark, as well as you, Paul, if you can please both share a bit of advice and guidance for professionals that are entering the industry, as well as those that are perhaps looking to take that step up into leadership positions.
I think for me, the greatest thing that you can do getting into cybersecurity is continue to be curious and ask questions. There are never any stupid questions in cybersecurity. They're all relevant in building knowledge, and the experience will come over time. But I think getting your hands dirty from the get-go, and there's various kind of security fundamentals you should understand first, I think. Now, I'm not saying go on a 5 or 7 year learning course, right? This could be done literally within days, a couple of weeks. Understand the fundamentals, get the course under your belt, go into an organization, start asking questions and being proactive about the approach. Laterally, out of the box, and just take the fundamentals and be fundamental, explore the options, be innovative, ask the questions, and look to do things different that's going to make a real difference in the world.
Be brave, be curious. Know about yourself.
Every turn. every turn.
And from your perspective, Mark?
I totally agree with Paul. I mean, from my perspective, third-party risk management is only going to become more and more prevalent. If you look at most data breaches, if you look at most attacks, a lot of them originate somewhere in the third-party supply chain. You touched on sort of commercialization earlier. We are seeing a trend, and it's an increasing trend, whereby more and more businesses are being asked as part of third-party due diligence to provide assurances around their cyber security, their wider cyber posture. That is incredibly challenging for SMEs. It's challenging enough for corporates. At least they have some of the benefit of having, let's just say, the resources and the money to facilitate that. Whereas SMEs find that incredibly challenging. If you said to me, what's the most number of calls I've taken in the last 6 weeks and what subject is it on? I can guarantee you now it's on third-party supply chain risks, because businesses are imposing these requirements on SMEs and they simply do not have the capacity, capability, money and resources to meet those requirements. And that's going to be a really interesting challenge. So if a particular business provides you with something that is core critical to your business delivery, yet it can't meet its security obligations, the question 101 is how are you going to manage that? So really interesting and really challenging. And I'm massively sympathetic, because it's hard enough, as I say, for big corporates to try and get it right, let alone your average SME, who probably is absolutely great at what they do, but has never really touched on this space.
And yeah, I mean, obviously, your guys, insight into Touchstone. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of talk about in terms of Quantum Evolve? What was your individual journeys into the business? And obviously, we've talked about the platform, but maybe, if you could sort of share some of the other challenges you're looking at and your overall purpose and vision.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to go first. So my own journey, as you probably know, Jay, would warrant a podcast in its own right. I've worked in 172 countries and actively engaged with over 125 corporates to date. So from a career perspective, I consider myself incredibly fortunate. I've worked with some of the largest organizations in the world. I've worked with brilliant people. They've been incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly helpful. But during that time, I've always had an itch. And that itch has been cybersecurity in principle, whilst it's incredibly challenging, is actually quite straightforward. Namely, you can't protect what you don't know you have. So Quantum Evolve provided me with a platform to scratch that itch. So that's a very short career perspective of 30 years, but the reality is at some point you need to get down to that basic, which you can only protect what you know you've got, and you need to take that not only from internal, but you need to take that right out to the perimeter, which is where this third-party requirement impacts. Paul, I don't know if you want to give a little bit about you in terms of that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So coming from a background of banking for 25 years and being in security for the last 9 years of my working career there, it was evident that something was missing. And that gap is when you have a CIO that puts down in front of you a piece of paper that says, I want to understand my risk exposure of all the platforms of our bank, and it takes 6 to 9 months or longer to get a result to that question, there's a problem. And working with vendors for the last 3-4 years of my career, it kind of begged the question of why I was enjoying those last 3 to 4 years more than any other time in the bank. And it was just purely because they were innovative. They were starting to do things that really challenged the status quo and the typical, let's look at McAfee for antivirus type question. Let's look at something different. Let's look at different ways of achieving risk exposure and understanding where problems are. And the big driver there for me was I wasn't going to achieve that in the bank because there wasn't enough rope, there wasn't enough funding. And so, 25 great years I had there was time to resign and go do something about the problem that I'd seen and manifests itself pretty much every organization today. They don't understand and they cannot have the vision or visibility into their environment that says, right, this is the whole risk exposure for our company. And these are the specific domains within that actually show the individual parts of the risk and the gaps within the organization. So having that drive and then meeting Mark and our fellow as well, the whole thing there was they have the same vision. They want to achieve the same aspects. How do you understand risk? Well, you've got to have visibility. You've got to have the right domains that are monitored and assessed completely. And once you have that, we give you then a single pane of glass view of that risk exposure. Right? So you don't have to go and spend 6 to 9 months finding out-of-date information. That means your risk exposure sort of 6 months back was actually 82%. Well, actually, if you had that continuous risk exposure every day, you'd realize that you were either 97%, which is brilliant, or you've slipped right down to 50%.
I mean, look, there's a fantastic collection of experience and passion amongst you guys. But what does the future hold for Quantum?
I mean, for me, it's relatively simple. Of course, we're going to continue to evolve our service offerings to ensure they identify and capture emerging risk and challenges, whether that be artificial intelligence, third-party supply chain, green IT, or even the ever-changing legal and regulatory landscape. I think what we need to be careful of is let's not sugarcoat it. Businesses are already under immense pressure to tackle and defeat cybercrime, and I think most feel like they're losing a battle most days. I think the advent of machine learning AI is going to be a huge benefit. Equally, let's not underestimate, because I see this underestimated daily, the bad guys are already weaponizing this. They are significantly ahead of the game when it comes to using AI for bad rather than good. And we should probably do another podcast around AI and its deployment and the risk associated with that. So we can't sit on our laurels. We need to continue to meet those challenges head on and enable businesses to at least have half a chance of standing up to the bad guys. That for me is what Quantum Evolve is all about.
And I think just on top of that, Mark, our services will always innovate. That's what we do. That's what we believe in. We have to move with the times. We have to try and keep ahead of the times wherever we can. And there's some real exciting stuff that's going to be happening around AI within the platform in future as well. So I'm sure we can share that at some point.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Sounds like another episode in the pipe for sure. And I mean, look, for any one of our listeners who wants to stay connected with you guys beyond the podcast, where else can they reach out to?
They can reach out on the website. They can reach out on LinkedIn. They can reach out via other distributors that utilizes as well as our name's well out there for anybody to use. But yeah, they've got the info at quantumevolve.com, also support at quantumevolve.com, either one of those, and they can get in touch.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, Paul, thank you very much. The community and all our listeners will certainly have found some value in today's episode. And if anyone wants to continue the discussion for more sustained engagement, I think as always to join the Secure CyberConnect community, where we're offering a range of collaborative solutions about tech and security professionals at no cost. These include expansive community access, cross-sector mutual mentoring programs, weekly online networking sessions, and a range of exclusive interviews such as this, panel discussions, masterclasses, and our weekly podcast. I learned then, if you want to learn more and gain access to the platform or any of our initiatives, please visit secure-recruitment.com/cyber-connect/. Thank you very much.